Before the introduction of the printing press, every manuscript was copied by hand and therefore extremely valuable. The Holy Bible, by far the most important book in Western society, took monks at least 100 days to copy it according to the analog pastor. This made paper manuscripts extremely expensive, enabling only the wealthy to purchase it. This led to a 70% illiteracy rate in the 1500s. That all changed with the printing press as information was able to be produced on a wide-scale basis. As colonialism spread, the printing press came with it, bringing technological advancement and freedom of speech into the United States colonies. The printing press first appeared in the northern colonies in 1638 in the Plymouth area. The American Antiquarian Society makes the case that the North's early implementation of the printing press foreshadows several key differences between the New England and Southern colonies, the North prioritizing education and religion. As Reverend Joseph Glover was the first one that brought the printing press over, he and his assistant Stephen Day ensured that to spread Christianity through their printing endeavors. How this would work is that Day would use a composition stick to place the letters of his text in the order he wishes them to appear, meaning it must be upside down and backwards so that it will appear correctly. Each line is composed one at a time. Then when the type is set in a large tray called a galley, after the printer is satisfied with his composition, Gay moves from his type to the galley into an iron frame known as a chase. He places wedges and fillers in this frame to tighten it up before he places the form onto his press. The printer inks his type with inking balls, then attaches a damp piece of paper to the type man. A frame called a frisket holds the paper in place on the type man. The printer then folds the type man over the type, and once folded, the printer refers the type paper over type combination as the coffin. The printer turns a handle on the side of the press to bring the type and paper under the press stain or stone. Once he is satisfied that all parts of the coffin have been pressed, he pulls it out from the patent and removes his printed page. The first books printed in the Massachusetts Bay Colony was the Freeman's Oath and the Bay of Psalm book, all in the first year of its establishment. The first successful newspaper in America was the Boston Newsletter, which appeared in 1704. The times of great expansion of the American colonies and with it the flow of information, wealth, and trade was not going to stay peaceful for long. Wars looming in the horizon and tensions which increased between the British and the Americans. The Americans developed their own sense of independent ideology through the Enlightenment philosophers becoming more and more at odds with the British. Arthur M. Schlesinger references that, quote, when the American colonists began to feel the tightening grip of imperial control after 1735, they naturally resorted to the printing press to dissipate their views and consolidate a favorable public support. The media takes the side of the American colonists, developing a journalistic warfare which eventually led to revolution and independence, especially as the first widespread employment of the newspaper colonies coincided with the implementation of the Stamp Act. The press grew increasingly discontent as a new act would pass on March 1764. The Stamp Act would entail that, quote, every copy of a newspaper or pamphlet printed on a half sheet or smaller size of paper carried a halfpenny duty, with a double rate up to a full sheet and a still higher one thereafter. There was besides a 2-shilling tax attached to every advertisement appearing in such publications. The tax would be almost impossible to violate because without the stamp, colonists jeopardized their property, liberty, and economic prosperity. By the time of these acts, there were 22 newspapers in colonial British North America, 9 of which were under the proprietorship of Benjamin Franklin and his allies. Well-versed in newspaper printers and their correspondents, recognizing the tax as a threat to their livelihoods and free expression, mounted a fierce propaganda campaign to rally public support. The printing presses laid a way to a new political info-war. Present-day commentator Michael Knowles makes the case that man is a political animal because man has the power of speech. Other beasts may have the ability to grunt or yell indignations of pleasure or pain, but only man has the power of speech to set forth the expedients and the inexpedient, and therefore likewise the just and the unjust, end quote. The papers make the case between good and evil, articulating these distinctions to protect the American family and soon-to-be American state. Frosca agrees with the printers of the colonial times, stating that, quote, the Stamp Act's arrival was aided with rigging and denunciations, equating the tax with the despotism and proclaiming that taxation without parliamentary representation constituted tyranny. As opinions of the British began to shift, publicists used printing to encourage American support and values of freedom, liberty, and democracy. Such instances of the Boston Massacre, the photo created by Paul Revere, encouraged righteous indignation in the American colonists. The invention of the Gutenberg press was more than 250 years before the colonial era. As print was popularized and technology advanced, there were many changes made to the original design. The type was set. Setting this was a very cumbersome task. A single page of a colonial newspaper could take up to 25 hours of labor to produce. The typesetting process was done by an employee or apprentice of the printer known as the compositor. An inking pad or a beater was used to spread the ink over the type, and the type would be arranged and held with an apparatus called a composing stick. The stone was a large, flat surface that held the work to be printed, and the press was the machine that transferred and arranged the lettering to a page. The press itself functioned by squeezing the paper against the arranged type with about 200 pounds of pressure to ensure the ink was deposited boldly and evenly on the paper. The paper was then set aside to dry before the other side was printing. Whilst researching the printing press, I actually decided to create this for my Tech Expo this year. Taking into account all the parts to construct, be it the frisket, the patent, or the girth itself, I found that one of the hardest parts to actually construct would be the rotating wheel and axle that would assist my device in flipping the paper over whilst printing. Through taking engineering graphic design this year, I learned that any problem can be solved with a T-square, a 30, 60, 90-degree triangle, and a pencil. Actually making the wheel and axle to scale, I was able to construct a diagram to assist me in my endeavors. Creating this for this spring would include the construction of a 6-foot frame approximately 4 inches thick, on wheels, of course. I'm a short individual, I need to be able to move it. The plank on the press stone needs to go inside it, and it needs to be at least 3 feet long. Obtaining the hose and the spindle would be the most complicated part as far as inventory assessment. Post the American Revolution, the Founding Fathers used the printing press to solidify their views in the society. To quote Federalist 10, a republic by which I mean a government in the scheme of representation takes place, opens a different prospect and promises the cure for which we are seeking. End quote. The Founding Fathers fought for a government that is for the people and by the people, but the right to liberty they fought for could not have been achieved without the freedom of thought and information the printing press's ingenuity provides them.